Tate Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on Healthcare Now Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world. From border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea, I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning in to the Tate Chronicles. Join me as we cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology, always searching for innovations. I'm really excited today. My guest is Rob Chappell. Rob is the co-founder and chief science officer of EyeTech Digital Systems. Rob developed eye gaze technology over 20 years ago for personal use and created the first USB-powered standalone eye tracker available in the market. EyeTech Digital Systems was founded in 1996 and designs algorithms, hardware, and software for eye tracking systems, which can be used in speech devices, which help paralyzed individuals communicate and control their computers hands-free using only eye movements. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
You know, I'm really fascinated by this topic, Rob. It seems like eye tracking has been around for a while. You've been involved with it for over a couple of decades, but we're in the very early stages of wider adoption. But from what I've read and learned about it, it may well be the next great human-machine interface. So first, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into the field of eye tracking?
You bet. Yeah, and I can totally see where you're going with that. I also believe it will be the next great interface. But about my background, so my educational background is in engineering. I have a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering. Did a lot of signal processing work and some software in my education. And then first job out of school was with Goodyear Aerospace here in Arizona, and they were developing their ground mapping radar systems. And that was a great job for me. It taught me a lot. When I was in engineering school, sometimes I'd hear people say, oh, you know, you're learning all this math and stuff, but you'll only use 10% of it. But it turned out in this job, I used 110%. It was very demanding mathematically and software-wise, so it was great training to have that job working in the radar area. So started there, worked there for a few years. Then I saw an opportunity near Tulsa, Oklahoma, to work in the pipeline services industry. They were developing a type of intelligent pipeline inspection device. They call them pipeline pigs. And so we moved back there, and I went to work developing the signal processing code that would run on this pipeline pig. And one interesting thing about that industry, which ties into why all this happened to me, is that these pipeline pigs, they would put them in a gas pipeline and run them for several miles across the country, and we would kind of chase them across country. And then we'd pick them up at the other end and download the data, and we could get information on the health of the pipeline. But these were kind of big operations, a little bit like a rocket launch or something. You had to coordinate with the pipeline company and the crew that would do it, and so you'd set a date and you'd work towards that date. And that's where I ran into trouble. Was we had this date set for a particular launch, and I was just coding computer code like crazy to go on the device, and came down with an injury, repetitive strain injury from too much computer use. I remember at the time thinking, well, yeah, my arms hurt, but they'll get better, and I'm going to take a break here because my wife is about ready to give birth to our second child at the time. I thought, I'll take a week off. I'll be fine. But I wasn't. You know, I took that week off and still wasn't good going back. It hurt. And so that kind of started a journey for me of finding alternative ways to interact with computers and alternative ways to do my work. And so that's where I first heard about assistive technology and that entire industry. So that's a little bit about the very start.
Well, and, you know, we often hear the phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. And so that sounds like exactly what happened to you. A need to invent something or address something kind of was forced upon you, as often happens. These kind of things.
Yes.
What are some of the primary uses of eye tracking technology today?
Well, still used as an interactive device for people that can't use their arms. That is the primary use, at least in our market space. So me personally, I started looking into other devices and methods and so on, and voice dictation was just starting to become a thing, but it was really painful. This was back in the 90s, so when you use voice dictation, you would say one word at a time, kind of like that, and very, very hard to use.
I remember.
But I did it because I thought, well, I can do something here, and I also would have assistant come in and work with me. So a lot of things I did, but it was a struggle, and so that was the motivation. But there are a lot of people out there that had a much worse problem than I had. There are so many people that have no way of communicating other than with their eyes. And so for these people, they need eye tracking like you and I need oxygen. And it became pretty quickly apparent that that's where the eye tracking business was going to go. And this was in the early days before all the funding procedures were in place and so on. So it was a smaller industry, but yet it was going that direction. So we started going to some of the conferences for assistive technology and started selling product. But that's, I think the most important market even today is for those people that need the technology to communicate, to operate their computer so they can send emails, they can control their television they want to watch, they can send text messages, they can talk to people in the same room, all these things they can do with just their eyes when they have no other way of doing it.
Well, let me ask you about some specifics. And I know at your company, Rob, you're really focused primarily or maybe totally on the healthcare field. For those folks who benefit from this technology, maybe you could describe a little bit about how they would interact with a internet browser. Do you have software or hardware?
Yeah.
Or how does that work? How would that work?
Yes. So I would think you should think of the eye tracking as being a computer mouse. That's the simplest way to think of it. And we really invented the first usable eye mouse, you would say, eye-controlled mouse, for use in Microsoft Windows. And so at the simplest layer, you can actually just pull up your Windows computer interface and you can move a cursor around and you can click on things. And you can click by dwelling, which is just staring at something, or with an eye blink. And there's software to give you tools such as double click and drag and all those things you can do with a mouse you can do with your eyes. So that's the simplest way to think about it. But then there's software that goes beyond that. And there's a few different companies have developed this software. And this software that kind of magnifies your efficiency and use, it will do things like it'll pull up a keyboard you can type on and it'll have word completion and phrase completion so you can type very quickly. In some cases, it'll pull up a grid of pictures and words and people can put together sentences and communication by just they just basically look at the boxes they want to select. And as they look at that box, it'll kind of highlight it because the eye tracker detects where they're looking. It'll like highlight it and then they stare at it and boom, it clicks it. So they can select these boxes and by doing that, they can type. And there's tools like that help with web browsing that make it easier to do with eye tracking. But you can just go directly to, say, the Chrome browser, and you can just go directly and click on the elements of the browser. You could type in using an on-screen keyboard. You could type in the phrase you want to search for instance, and then you can go to websites and you just look at the object you want to click on, put the cursor on it, and then click. Either the two methods I mentioned were dwell or eye blink. So it's very intuitive. Some people are better than others. There's power users that are extremely fast and accurate, and then others that are just happy with basic communication. But it's as simple as just looking and clicking. Yeah.
You know, and it sounds like this was developed, of course, because of your initial thing decades ago when you weren't able to use a keyboard. Right. And so you got into it. And there's certainly a healthcare related need for it. Do you see opportunities where folks who are able to use a keyboard, there'd still be advantages for them to use this technology? Are there other
Yes, I can think of a few cases. First of all, just with your ordinary daily computer use on a laptop, for instance, eye tracking can make it more efficient. And I think a lot of work still needs to be done here to make the software eye tracking friendly. Like, I really think the makers of the operating systems need to start paying more attention to it. And they've done some. We've worked with Microsoft in the past, and they've got their eye tracking SDK and so on. But more needs to be done there, because it can lead to, combining eye tracking with some capability on the keyboard can make things much more efficient. For instance, you might have 3 documents up on your screen. You could use the eye tracking to quickly place the cursor in one document at a certain area, and then you could jump on and type with your fingers or voice dictation, and so quickly move back and forth between documents, highlight things. Things like that can be done very quickly with eye tracking, faster than you can do with a mouse. Now, if you're going in and doing a very precise selection or drawing, that's maybe a little faster with the mouse.
Sure.
But yeah, by combining them, I'm really hopeful that the software will catch up to all this in the future. Well, absolutely.
You know, one thing, kind of a buzzword in healthcare and other industries now is artificial intelligence or machine learning. Are you doing some work to leverage that AI support to eye tracking functionality?
Yes, and let me explain a little more about the healthcare aspect. So we've talked about using it as an interface device, but there's also a huge, probably even potentially even a bigger market in healthcare using it for screening and diagnostics, and AI comes to play in this, screening, diagnostics, and also therapy. Just to give you an idea, I have a friend, there's a young person that's a friend of our family, and she developed a brain tumor. Fortunately, it's been taken care of. Things are looking good for her. But the first thing, what finally sent her to the hospital and got her diagnosed was she started having trouble with her vision. And that's often the case. And had she been doing eye tracking tests, they might have picked it up weeks earlier. But by some estimates, more than 50% of the brain is involved in visual processing. If you think of how the eyes and the brain work, the eye is structured sort of like an ordinary digital camera. It's got a lens, and it has a surface with the pixels on the back with your retina. And so you think of it, it's just like a digital camera. But beyond that, there is a tremendous amount of processing that happens. And by the time the visual image that you're seeing right now, by the time that reaches your conscious brain, most of the processing has already been done. The shapes have been figured out, the lines, the positioning, all that's done subconsciously, comes to the brain, and then you just sort things out at the conscious level finally. But so if there's any problems in the brain throughout these, almost any part of the brain, if there's problems, it'll almost always show up in eye tracking. And just to give you an idea, so with eye tracking, there's typically, at a very basic level, there's 3 things you want to measure or look at. You look at fixations, which is when you just are looking at an object, staring at it. Saccades, which is where you're jumping from one object to the other with your eye gaze. And then there's smooth pursuit. So that's more like where you're watching a bird fly across the sky. And all 3 of those things, the brain and the eyes are highly adept at performing those functions. And but any kind of problem with the brain that could be caused by any number of neurological problems will show up in the subtle numbers when you do these. So a lot of neurological investigation and screening is done by, they'll do an MRI, maybe nothing will show up, but they'll have an interview with the doctor. He'll go through your symptoms. He'll say, well, it could be this or that. With eye tracking, you can actually get objective numbers and data that says, hey, something has changed here, and it's showing up in the numbers. Just one more example.
Sure.
I had a friend come over who we wanted to let him just try out this eye tracker, run a game on it just for fun. And so as he was calibrating, he says, oh, by the way, I've had a little bit of a problem with a lazy eye, and when I do sports, I have to compensate for it. And I go, oh, okay, that's interesting. So he went through the calibration, and I looked at the results and I go, yeah, I can see right here your left eye is off by 2 degrees. He goes, yeah, you're right. That's the one. And so it's very precise, and you can pick up little subtle problems with this. So that's an exciting area of healthcare. And then with artificial intelligence, one of the great things about that is it can help to recognize patterns and classifications in this data. So in the past, people would get data and they'd go in and write an algorithm to parse the data and figure out, okay, what's it telling us? Well, now you just have to collect large amounts of data, and the algorithm is written for you by artificial intelligence. That's a really powerful, exciting thing from our standpoint.
You mentioned diagnostics, and boy, there is a lot there to unpack, Rob. I know there is a area of therapy that involves eye movement. I want to call it MDR or EMDR. Do you know what I'm talking about at all? It's like they have you track a pendulum or something like that back and forth with your eyes at a certain pace. Yeah.
Is this for the purpose of fixing eye alignment problems, this kind of thing? Or?
No, this is like a psychological thing. I think it's called
psychological.
EMDR. And it is a way to, I don't want to say regress, but allow people to, and it's not off the wall, a very, very common, well-established therapy technique that allows the therapist to get a person to a slightly different level of consciousness, maybe less defended. But it is invoked by a certain side-to-side eye movement at a certain frequency.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's called
fascinating.
EMDR. And then and that's with the eyes open. And then I spent years working in a sleep center. Of course, we were always fascinated with rapid eye movement, and that's with, of course, the eyes are closed. But there's kind of I guess I want to say old saying, but old is new again, that the eyes are the window to the soul. A lot can be learned from the eyes. What they're doing, how they move, how they gain.
Yeah. It's amazing. Even things like ADHD can be detected with eye tracking tests, autism, Parkinson's disease. All these things affect how a person uses their vision and their eyes. And the beautiful thing I like about it is that it gives you hard numbers. Like you could compare someone's numbers today with what they were a year ago, and the doctor could look at that and say, oh, there's a definite change here. Your saccades are 25% more noisy or something like that,
Yeah.
That's a super exciting thing to me.
Yeah. And the whole idea of being used for diagnostic reasons, has any work been done on protocols yet?
Oh, yes. You could go, online and find lots of research papers and tests done, and we've done some work with Mayo that's public, so I can mention that. We're working with other partners I can't necessarily mention. But, there's a lot of companies getting into this space. It's still early, I would say, but it's an interesting space, and there's definitely a lot of activity there developing. It's kind of limitless, the different types of tests you can do. Some of them are pure eye tracking. Some of them involve eye tracking plus some type of cognitive component, such as adding numbers or things like that. And they come up with their own test protocols. And the real goal would be to get data out where you can tell specifically what the issue is. You can't always do that. You can almost always tell there is an issue, but they're hopeful that they can tell more specifically, get the specificity out of it, if I said that right.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah. Just in talking to you, Rob, I just keep having different thoughts come up and possibilities about this technology. I'm sitting here and I have a smartphone that uses facial recognition to log in. Well, it's obviously looking at my face. Well, it wouldn't be too far for that to jump to it tracking my eyes and eye tracking to open any app or do whatever I wanted to on my phone without having to sit there and punch on it.
You're absolutely right. And I think they're starting to put in more hardware that can do that, infrared lighting and so on, that would make it work better. So let me just briefly mention two types of eye tracking. There's the what I call the webcam style eye tracking, where it's just using your built-in camera in your laptop or phone, no extra lighting. It's usually low accuracy and it's very subject to the lighting in the room and so on. And then there's precision eye tracking, which is more what we've concentrated on, where you've got the infrared illumination, you have the camera with just the right lens, so you get maximum resolution. We can get very precise and high-speed measurements. They're both valuable in their own space, but they're kind of two different things. But I see in the future they could have both on phones for sure. There's no reason not to.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's coming, because it would just be evolutionary steps on top of the work that folks like you and others have done over decades.
Absolutely.
Who are your customers at EyeTech Digital Systems? Are they companies? Are they individuals?
Well,
is it the government?
Both.
Yeah.
We do have a direct sales force, and we'll go out and we typically work in the AAC, that's assistive augmented communication market. We work with speech pathologists, and they're kind of the gatekeepers. They're usually working with these people that have a need for eye tracking, and so we'll work with them, demonstrate the product, and we do direct sales, and they'll get it paid for with different types of insurance, including government insurance of different types. Depends on the state they're in and so on. But so that's a big part of the marketplace. We do also sell a lot to other distributors and dealers, and we also sell outside of assistive technology. We sell to people that are in the research space as well.
You know, we're almost totally out of time, Rob, but
okay.
I appreciate you really bringing to the audience today, to me, a really fascinating subject that I have not known much about at all. But before we let you go, what's the best way for our listeners to either make contact with you or to find out more about EyeTech Digital Systems?
You bet. Well, we have a website.
Great.
It's eyetechds.com, and that's I with EYE, TECHDS, as in digitalsystems.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn. They could search for Robert Chappell. That's Chappell with 2 P's and 2 L's. And I'm on LinkedIn. People find me there and message me from time to time, so that's good too. So be happy to hear from anybody, and it was a pleasure being here today.
Well, and I enjoyed it also, Rob. To our audience, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Tate Chronicles. I offer a special salute to my guest today, Rob Chappell of EyeTech Digital Systems. Rob, thanks for coming aboard today.
Okay, thank you.
You can find more information on this show's program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.